is C14. Has one of its interesting features is this. Looks like a bullet went through there. I don't know if that's from being struck while standing or falling. Something with a lot of velocity went through there and flared that open. But no evidence of bolts just simply popping.
Faster than anywhere I've ever seen, but I accepted it at the time, and for years I accepted it because it was a recovery and rescue operation, and that's normal to have something like that going. Again, we've never seen it.
As far as connections go, this 56th floor section did exactly what one would hope. Connections were stronger than the material being joined. But no evidence of bolts just simply popping.
Like it, but that was expected. What I didn't
Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
So I was just standing there, we were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then the worst part about it, we saw the smoke and the plumes of smoke coming after us, and we had to run.
They also admit that they refused to test the explosives, or to test for explosives or residue of thermite. Now, this is what I'm going to go into here just real quickly, is there are national standards for an investigation. That's what all of us are asking for, an investigation that follows national standards and holds people accountable. This manual right here, just so you can see it, is what we call the kind of the Fire Investigation 101. This is the most basic fire investigation manual there. This is for the 2001 edition. This is what should have been referred to, at least. It doesn't have to be followed exactly, but it should have been used as a conspiracy theory stuff. 19.2.4, exotic accelerants. If on the scene you find melted steel or concrete, you should consider the use of exotic accelerants. And they specifically say in the manual, thermite mixtures produce exceedingly hot fires that can account for melted steel and concrete. It also says they leave residues that can be tested for visually and chemically identifiable. Again, they did not test for it. And just put it in perspective, on a routine house fire, if we suspect even the slightest use of an accelerant, we're going to test for it when there's no fatalities, when there's very little property damage. So to not do it on this, there is absolutely no excuse. I can't drive that point home enough. 18.15 is analyze fuel source. All available fuel sources should be considered and eliminated until one fuel can be identified as meeting all the physical damage criteria. For example, if you find pulverized concrete, which we all know there was in all 3 buildings, there was pulverized concrete, that only fuels that can create seeded explosions should be considered. So they shouldn't be considering fires. They shouldn't be doing that. It doesn't account for pulverized concrete. They should only be considering exotic accelerants and explosives. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. The terrorist may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons along with explosives used in furthering his or her goal. We know they used them in 93. Why would we not know they used them in 93? Why would we not test for them now? There was reports that day, multiple reports, which I'll get into in a second. So they could have put them in the basement. How do we know that unless we test for it? I mean, even if it is the terrorists that they claim they are, we need to test this. 14.3, preservation of the fire scene and physical evidence. We find the following. The cause of a fire explosion is not known until near the end of the investigation. The entire fire scene should be considered physical evidence and should be protected and preserved. It's just over and over. There's so many. You can go to our website, the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We have many more of these actual chapters that cover what they should have done that they did not do. So now, by their own admission, in all 3 building collapses, NIST refused to physically test, like Dr. Stephen Jones did, for explosives. This is just unbelievable. And here are their excuses, and I quote, "It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected, either prior to September 11th or during that day." So again, I've been on a lot of fire scenes, and I've seen a lot of investigations, and why would we not test because something's hard to do? That's the exact reason you need to investigate it. If that was hard to do, we need to find out how they did it. And number 2, NIST excuse. In addition, no blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of the video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or reported by witnesses. That's one of their excuses why they didn't test. Well, apparently they didn't read Chapter 18. 18 is the general definition of explosions. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not, in big bold letters, an essential element in the definition of an explosion. The generation and violent escape of gases are the primary criteria of an explosion. So that alone says they should have tested for it. But then we also, NIST has lied, and we can prove it as soon as the new investigation happens. The evidence is out there for you to see right now. We have 118 first responders who reported explosions. We have the radio transmissions from FDNY members that are still recorded today that reported explosions. We have audio recordings. We have video recordings. I've personally talked to witnesses that heard them. So there's nothing short of saying they lied, and they need to be held accountable. And besides that, like I said, there is no excuse for not testing for explosives. And so at the very least, at the very best, even if you want to believe the official story, this was the most incompetent investigation of all time. And I've talked to a lot of investigators that were there, and I asked them the specific question, why did they refuse to test? They weren't the ones who refused, but NIST did. And they said, all they can answer is incompetence, or they tell me to shut up. They cannot give me any reason that follows national standards. So, but the reality, after all the research everybody here and the incredible people we're in the room with today have done, the reality is it was a criminal investigation to cover up the crime. So, just to finish, I'd like to read a quote. This is from a retired, decorated FDNY lieutenant. Anyone who knows the fire service, he is a stud. He worked on Ladder Company 26, Rescue Company 3, Rescue Company 1 in his career. Anyone who knows, those are amazing companies. Here's his comment. Trade Tower 7 by itself is the smoking gun, not hit by an aircraft with only a few relatively small fires. It came down in a classic crimp and implosion, going straight into its basement, something only very precise demolitions can accomplish, which takes days, if not weeks, to prepare. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention it, and FEMA actually stated they didn't know why it collapsed and left it at that. Brothers, I know that the above implications are hard, almost unthinkable, but the official explanation is utter nonsense, and 343 of our murdered brothers are crying out for justice. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of interest that we'd find would be some of the parts of the plane embedded in the cars and in places in which you just wouldn't expect. A part of the fins off the turbine off of one of the engines was actually found embedded into one of the engine blocks of one of the cars. But I think the most unique thing about this investigation has just been the unbelievable damage, the levels of heat in which, in certain instances, firearms were found in some of the vehicles that had completely melted down, and the temperatures that we were told were in the area of 3,000 to 4,000 degrees, that they melted a steel revolver down into a blob of metal again. These were some of the things. An engine block that was aluminum, and its pistons were cast iron, and other parts of the engine were steel, and the aluminum had actually melted around the steel and the iron and had dripped off like teardrops coming from the parts of the car. Fronts of automobiles that just melted away from the extreme heat, and yet the rest of the automobile was otherwise intact. And these steel automobiles that give people such belief in being secure and well made while they're driving 70 miles an hour on a highway are found to be little piles of tin cans after they've been struck by the immensity of this attack.
but breakable shards on the end here.
This 8-ton steel I-beam is 6 inches thick. It was selected to be preserved for future generations for the near-perfect horseshoe-like bend formed during the collapse.
I found it hard to believe that it actually bent because of the size of it and how there's no cracks in the iron. It bent without almost a single crack in it. It takes thousands of degrees to bend steel like this.
Typically you'd have buckling and tearing on the tension side, but there's no buckling at all.
This is a piece of steel that I found in the North Tower. It was down around basement 4. There was 6 levels of the World Trade Center. You know, the box beam was melted like stalactites and stalagmites. So it was tremendous heat that melted these big, huge box beams where the steel was just dripping onto each other and stacking up. So I snapped a piece of it off just to show other people how hot the World Trade Center site was.
Down the Twin Towers using nothing but infrasound.
Really?
We were Eastern Bloc bringing down 25-story buildings using nothing but sound wave infrasound.
Good heavens.
And I did discuss this recent years with a Professor Francie, who remarked, and don't, this, that, and the other thing with respect to that 9/11 fast that we saw. And of course, we all know that Michael Meacher, who was a cabinet minister, was removed from office because he publicized the fact that he had read, word for word, what was to happen to the Twin Towers 3 years before the event.
3 years before the event?
3 years before the event. It was a well-planned thing. It was a well-known external skin. Each section weighing around 40 ton. It behaved exactly the way it should have done had it been influenced by infrasound, which is what I witnessed with the training that I was doing in the mid-60s, watching what the Brits, the Russians, and the Americans had been doing in Eastern Europe back in the late 50s. Look at it, you will see that the corner of this building, which is way distant from the Twin Towers positioning, 3 of its floors are torn apart on the corner. Now, there was no way that material from the Twin Towers could have flown out and struck that building.
Not at all.
So, in my discussions, arguments with Professor Francie, I said that as far as I was concerned, that infrasound influence upon those buildings was satellite-based. And of course, his remark to me was, well, how could that be, Dean? He said, we couldn't have anything from space coming in by way of sound wave, infrasound, or anything. I said, yeah, but it could be electromagnetic, and then it's transposing itself as it gets within our atmosphere. The thing here, to understand, conventional thinking would have to have applied, but this building is the telltale that that was not struck by debris from one of the Twin Towers, and so what influenced it to be broken apart? And the thinking for me was that it had to have been some form of infrasound that was played on a large area in which the Twin Towers occupied. And Professor Francie was quite taken with that idea, went along with it, although one hasn't ever had the opportunity of proving such.
There's questions to ask like, why were over 1,000 bodies completely unrecoverable? From a gravity-driven collapse, we know that in an earthquake, people are dug up alive for days afterwards. Bodies are found in gravity-driven collapses. In this one, over 1,000 bodies, no trace whatsoever, no DNA trace. Where did they go?
Bombing the city.
Boom, boom, that's all I heard.
Because there were these explosions.
Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, that's all I heard.
One after the other. And the entire ferry terminal was shaking. because there were these explosions, one after the other. And the entire ferry terminal was shaking. You know, this is a kilometre from ground zero. The whole building was shaking. People are screaming, and there's these explosions. Like, the next one's going to hit the Staten Island ferry. We're gone, and it didn't.
Pouring out of the World Trade Center at this moment. Pouring out of the World Trade. Pouring out of the World Trade.
Also closed down. Let's go to 1010 Wins reporter Eileen LaPalmer. She is at City Hall. Eileen?
Well, Lee, I'm here live outside of City Hall. The entire, as you can imagine, it is absolute chaos here. The entire city has come to a standstill. Everyone just standing, looking at the smoke pouring out of the World Trade Center at this moment. There are certain people trying to call their families. And then the next thing I heard, an explosion, and the building from the top, the south building, just crumbled.
That's the building?
Yeah.
People that understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings can blow up. This ain't done yet.
Nothing no more worse than this. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on the inside the building. So I don't think we get any worse than this.
Third explosion also, right? We were in the building for the third one. It collapsed. I was on this drive here for the other one. Just trying to find anybody.
Mayday. Mayday, mayday. Command post, ladder 6. Mayday.
As fires rage nearby, the survivors in the ruins of Stairwell B come to realize that it may take days for rescue workers to reach them.
At one point, we had an explosion that came by that was pretty close, and it shook the stairway. At one point, we had an explosion that came by that was pretty close, and it shook the stairway.
Now, how did you get hurt, James?
I was, my assignment with Latitude 4, the company I'm assigned to, we were supposed to go into building number 2, the South Tower, and make our way into Tower number 1, the North Tower. And we were caught in the collapse in the lobby of Tower number 2, the South Tower.
Train sounds, and the building starts imploding. One floor after one. Tremendous boom. And all that smoke that was in the air and the cross street, as the building imploded, it created a vacuum. And it starts sucking this smoke from the cross streets and in the air towards the core. Like they're bombing the financial area. I gotta go save my wife. And I can't rationalize it in my head. And the first time in my life I became angry. I mean, really, really, really angry.
Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen.
I was out here. I was out here. I heard two explosions. I was out here. I was out here. I heard two explosions.
It's very important.
Why do you ignore the 9/11 truth movement?
I think
this is the most important thing that is going on in this country right now.
I would encourage people to go to our website and go to our September 11th show, where we had a very interesting,
We have an enormous explosion now in the remaining World Trade Tower Center. It happened the same way. The explosion started high in the building and worked its way down. And I would be very anxious to hear in the future the forensics of this situation.
Result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
What and how that got that way?
It's nothing short of a miracle. No sign that building was covered.
Buildings are made of air. Most of the building is made of air. The building is made
almost cleanly on themselves. Where did they go? Question when you saw those two giant towers collapse almost cleanly on themselves. Where did they go? I have read in some architecture article that they were made mostly of air. If you consider the space between the solid molecules, the steel, the concrete, the glass, the aluminum, there was a lot of air. It was mostly air actually, mostly feeling.
Which owns the hangar and the Trade Center site.
The rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat into one single element.
And almost like a chunk of lava from Kilauea or Iceland, where they're very sharp but breakable shards on the
the primary thing.
The process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
The process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
I've never had to issue a hijack. What if do it, my dirty work. Under the threats, I did it. And that's why I've been, it's just a haunting thing. So occasionally, once a year, I'll go search and see if anybody even cared about what happened to that flight. So.
Well, thank you very much, Rick Wilder. Thank you for speaking with me about this.
Thank you.
And thank you for...
Correct. Management at what we call headquarters, but the headquarters, it could have been.
The order came from headquarters, what you're referring to as headquarters, or do you think it originated farther up the chain of command than from them?
What little bit I've read, and I haven't listened to tapes, I just read a few logs that were publicly available, and I really can't determine who gave the order.